Inflation is the word on everybody's lips right now, and a lot of it is coming from the supply chain. You focused on that when you spoke to investors. The statement talked about it as well. Jacek, just talk to me a little bit about what kind of input inflation pressure you're feeling. What is the supply chain story doing to you right now?
Oh, thank you for having me here. Actually, I have to correct one thing. You call me a cigarette maker, but to be true, I am less and less of a cigarette maker. We are, much more focused on alternative to cigarette to smoking. There is inflationary pressure. Coming from upstream on the components, especially the electronic components which we're using for the alternative to smoking. We have a less pressure from the materials which we're using in our products like leaf tobacco, etc. But there is some pressure. I think they are manageable, and I don't think they're going to be a long-lasting. We're all aware about the shortages. I mentioned components. There's also some constraints around the logistics, the air freight. Is getting more expensive these days. I think for 2022 we will go, and we issued the guidance yesterday, and I think in 2023 a big part of these pressures will just go away, will disappear.
Jacek, thank you for joining us. Kriti, Gupta in New York. I want to talk to you a little bit more micro here about your IQOS production. I believe we have some reporting here that says you're going to start producing them again in the first half of 2023. Can you give us some numbers around that production, where exactly you plan to manufacture them?
Well, we are in a process of building the capacity for the U.S. domestic, but also not for the U.S. domestic market. Actually, if we look at the size of an opportunity of the U.S. was always in our strategic priorities, and I believe now because of the ITC case, as you're aware, that we have a dispute with one of our competitors around an IP. We believe we will prevail on the validity of IP, but in the meantime, we need to make everything possible to start providing again IQOS to American smokers. We will build that capacity. We should have a first production for commercial purposes ready in the Q1 2023. So the entire 22 we will spend over making sure that the product is right and everything is up and running there.
Okay, let's just talk a little bit about what your plans are specifically to get around that ITC ruling. The ruling was in September 2021. It's a BAT case that was brought against you. Just talk to me about the plan for dealing with that. At the moment, you are not allowed into the United States with that product. When do you think that is going to change? What is your plan to getting to that point?
Well, there is a two-pronged strategy. On the one hand, to verify or to prove whether the patents are valid, and we've been pretty successful in the first phase with regards to the one patent for the USPTO office. The ruling for the second patent is expected. Obviously, the other party has the right to appeal, so we know that the whole process around the IP invalidation takes a time. In the meantime, we subject to the ITC ruling, and we need to comply with this. But the way to mitigate this and provide the product to the consumers in the US is essentially to build the local manufacturing. But on the other hand, if you take the size of the US market, the manufacturing was always somewhere in our thinking, not maybe at this stage. So we're just executing the plan faster ahead of what normally we would do. I do believe that ultimately, eventually, on the IP side, we will prevail with regards to the validity of the patents. But in the meantime, we just have to go and overcome this constraint.
Jacek, I believe about 2 weeks ago, Altria made a statement that there was some disagreement about simply the attainment of sales targets regarding the IQOS product. Can you speak about your relationship with Altria right now?
Well, we're having the conversations around the interpretations of the contracts and obviously the consequences whether certain performance criteria met with regards to the duration of exclusivity of this agreement for Altria. And as I said, we are in conversations with Altria, so I believe that there is a room to find amicable resolution of that problem. For the time being, we are focusing on, as I said, as fast as possible, bring back the IQOS to the US, and manufacturing is obviously on the critical path to achieve it.
Jacek, can I just talk more broadly about how investors are going to perceive you as a company, as an investment proposition? The stock's been on a fairly good run recently. And I guess when you look at the mathematics of it, in some ways that makes sense. Tobacco, and I'm not sure about heated tobacco, but I'm assuming this is broadly roughly the same, is a high tax product. I think here in the UK, I think tobacco, I think the tax rate is somewhere around 80% in terms of what the consumer is ultimately paying. As a result of which, higher inflation actually means, because of that high tax rate, that any high inflation that you see and pass on to the consumer is a relatively small proportion of the final price that the consumer ultimately pays. How much of that is going to protect you during the phase that is coming towards us right now? Do you see high inflation coming, and do you see that being a benefit ultimately for PMI stock?
Well, I mean, we're dealing here with the two sort of problems. I mean, the taxation on the cigarettes and the combustible cigarettes, yes, in many countries is in a 70-80% of the final price to the consumer. On the alternative market, you know, quite rightly, in most of the jurisdictions, governments recognize they have or the harm reduction potential, therefore taxation is lower. We also translate it into the lower price to the consumer, so there is more room for any actions, pricing actions, if they need it in order to somehow mitigate the impact of inflation. But we also know from a combustible segment, elasticities in the cigarette industry are relatively not high. Okay, so we will see how this unfolds. One thing which we have to observe, which always is the undesired consequences of a too fast or too high price excise increases, is the illicit trade. I mean, you mentioned UK, there is quite a high incidence of illicit trade. You take France in Europe, 30% of illicit trade. So these are the things which I believe always have to be taken into consideration, because we may just not only not realize our revenue, but the governments are missing also their revenue targets. So.
Jacek, let's stick with that theme of simply your stock price here. With the stock price, of course, and with those returns, have come with a pretty juicy dividend yield. I'm looking at 4.7% here. It's grown about 3.5% per year. It's a major draw to investors, not only to your stock, but to Altria's as well. What is your dividend policy going forward?
Well, we target 75% payout ratio, and we're getting at that level, and the shareholders' returns, however, for the dividend, we're also carrying the share buyback program. I mean, these are the principal ways of returning the benefits of the cash to shareholders. Well, I think we should take it in a context which makes me personally, as the CEO and my company, proud that we maintain the very attractive returns to the shareholders while transforming the company. We're essentially cannibalizing combustible business, and we want to cannibalize the combustible business, but generating excellent growth at the bottom, at the top line and the bottom line, while keep the rewards to the shareholders. You don't have that many transformations of the industry or the company of the size of ours. Then you're migrating from one product to another and essentially immuning your investors, your shareholders, from any negative impact. So we continue the dividend payments. We have a year-on-year dividend increases, and wherever we have an extra cash, we go back to we activate the share buyback program. So I believe from an investor's perspective, it's a pretty attractive company.
Jacek, do you think that ability to return money to shareholders in such a meaningful way outweighs the concern that the market will have on its focus increasingly surrounding ESG? How do the scales kind of work there?
Well, I think it's absolutely right that we all focus on ESG, and ESG is in the heart of our of what we're doing at PMI, and I will take it so seriously and very seriously, because we started with our product. I mean, we do recognize that our product, combustible cigarettes, creates the harm. That the ideal thing is that the consumers should quit smoking, and this is what we very openly advise and say at every occasion. We also recognize that people don't, and they need alternatives. Now, today we're living in the world that the technology and the science can prove and demonstrate and deliver at scale the alternatives, which are vastly better than continuing smoking. So we're starting our sustainability path from the product. And then obviously it's very important, what do we do about the environment? What do we do with the labor force, our employees? What do we do about the governance? I'm very happy to announce, that's something which already, frankly speaking, was announced. Our ESG sustainability report was rated as one of the best in class in any industry. So we're doing a lot of great efforts, obviously recognizing that unless and until we solve the problem of the product, some people might have different opinions, but I think this company, Philip Morris International, is doing everything what is possible to build a very sustainable business in all aspects of the sustainability.